The day started like any other episode of the popular live talk show. Bright studio lights filled the stage, the audience clapped and cheered, and cameras pointed toward the set, waiting to capture every moment. On this particular day, however, there was something different. The producers had decided to surprise everyone by inviting Keanu Reeves as a guest. It was not announced beforehand, so when the host introduced him, the crowd erupted in cheers. People stood on their feet, clapping loudly, their faces lit up with excitement. Keanu Reeves walked onto the stage quietly, dressed in his usual simple style dark blazer, casual shirt, and that calm smile people knew him for. He raised his hand gently, acknowledging the audience, and bowed his head slightly as a gesture of respect. His presence immediately brought warmth to the room. He didn't rush, didn't wave dramatically, and didn't act like a superstar. He simply walked with the kind of grace that made people admire him even more. On the other side of the set sat Judge Judy, known around the world for her sharp tongue and no-nonsense attitude. She had been invited as a special celebrity guest host for that day's show. The moment she saw Keanu stepping onto the stage, she adjusted her glasses and smirked a little, clearly preparing something witty to say. The contrast between the two was striking. Keanu, soft-spoken and humble, and Judy, bold and direct, sitting together on live television. It promised an interesting conversation. As Keanu took his seat, the host welcomed him and started with a few light-hearted questions about his latest movie and his reputation as one of the kindest actors in Hollywood. The audience listened carefully, nodding and smiling whenever Keanu answered. His replies were short, thoughtful, and genuine, as if he carefully chose each word. He didn't rush into long stories or try to entertain with big jokes. He simply spoke from the heart, and that was enough to hold everyone's attention. But then, the moment that would soon become unforgettable began to unfold. Judge Judy leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, and looked at Keanu with sharp curiosity. "You know, Keanu," she said in her strong, straightforward voice, "people say you live by faith, kindness, and old-fashioned values. Don't you think that's a little outdated in today's world?" The audience laughed, not knowing whether to take it as a joke or a serious challenge. Some clapped, others looked around nervously, wondering how Keanu would respond. Judy's comment wasn't exactly cruel, but it carried a mocking tone, as if she found it amusing that someone in Hollywood could still believe in such things. Keanu didn't answer right away. He sat quietly, his eyes gentle but steady, as though he was thinking carefully. Instead of reacting with offense, he simply smiled and nodded his head once. His silence seemed to surprise everyone. For a few seconds, the studio was filled only with the sound of shifting chairs and a few awkward giggles from the audience. Judge Judy, noticing his calmness, added another comment. "I mean, Hollywood isn't exactly a place for saints. People out there don't get rewarded for being humble and kind. They get rewarded for being bold and ruthless. Don't you think you're swimming against the tide?" This time, the audience laughed louder, perhaps expecting Keanu to defend himself or give a clever comeback. Some clapped again, enjoying Judy's boldness. The atmosphere shifted from cheerful to tense, as everyone now leaned forward in anticipation. It was clear that the exchange had gone beyond playful banter. It had turned into a challenge, a clash of perspectives, one side blunt and skeptical, the other calm and deeply grounded. Keanu still didn't rush into his answer. He leaned back slightly in his chair, hands resting loosely on his lap, his expression relaxed. There was something about his silence that made the audience quieter too. People who had been laughing moments ago now waited carefully, curious to hear what he would say. His stillness, his composure, carried more weight than any sharp reply could have. Meanwhile, the cameras captured every detail: the slight smirk on Judge Judy's face, the nervous excitement of the crowd, and Keanu's calm, almost meditative presence. Millions of viewers would later watch this moment online, but at that time, only the people in the studio felt the tension rising. The host tried to lighten the mood with a small joke, but even that couldn't break the intensity. Everyone was focused on Keanu. He had not yet spoken, but his silence alone seemed like an answer. The audience could feel that something meaningful was about to happen. Then, at last, Keanu turned his head slightly toward Judge Judy and gave a gentle smile. His lips parted as if he was about to speak, but then he closed them again for a moment, almost as though he wanted to make sure his words were right. The suspense grew stronger. It was in that still moment that people realized this was not just an ordinary television exchange. It wasn't scripted humor, nor was it a simple question-and-answer session. Something deeper was unfolding. Judge Judy, perhaps unintentionally, had touched upon the very core of Keanu Reeves's life, the values and beliefs that guided him through fame, loss, and hardship. And although the world didn't know it yet, his response, when it came, would soon echo far beyond that studio. But for now, the scene ended with silence, anticipation, and the feeling that something powerful was about to be said. The studio was filled with a strange mix of laughter and silence. Judge Judy had just repeated her sharp observation about how Hollywood did not reward saints, and the crowd seemed divided. Some people laughed and clapped, enjoying the boldness of her words. Others shifted in their seats, feeling slightly uncomfortable about the direction of the conversation. A few faces in the audience showed curiosity, eager to see how Keanu would answer such a challenge. Keanu sat quietly, his calmness almost unusual for a live setting. He didn't rush, didn't frown, and didn't show any sign of being offended. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, his dark eyes fixed on Judy, as though he was really listening and not just preparing a comeback. That silence had its own weight. It pulled the room in, forcing everyone to pay attention. Judge Judy, perhaps sensing that her comments had unsettled the atmosphere, smiled sharply and added another layer. "You're different, Keanu. People talk about how you give up your seat on trains, how you live modestly despite your wealth, how you even avoid big Hollywood parties. But let's be real, does that kind of behavior really work in this industry? Don't you feel out of place sometimes?" This time, the laughter from the audience was louder, but it carried a nervous edge. The cameras zoomed in on Keanu, capturing every slight movement of his face. Viewers at home would later see the way he tilted his head just a little, almost like he was considering the question carefully, as though he respected the seriousness behind it even if it came wrapped in humor. The host shifted in his chair, trying to ease the tension with a quick comment about Keanu's movie career, but Judy pressed on. Her voice carried the same confidence it always did, the kind that made her famous in her courtroom show. "You've had your share of hits and misses, Keanu. The world knows your story. But when you talk about faith, humility, or kindness, people say it's admirable, but is it practical? I mean, you can't go through life expecting kindness to win in every situation." Her words struck the air like a hammer. The crowd grew quieter this time. Some nodded in agreement with her, others crossed their arms, as though they were waiting to see whether Keanu would break his calm and finally push back. But he didn't. Instead, he simply took a slow breath. His posture remained steady, his hands resting on his lap, fingers relaxed. It was almost as if he carried a kind of unshakable peace that couldn't be moved, no matter what was thrown at him. That very composure seemed to unsettle some of the audience more than any sharp retort would have. The silence stretched long enough for people to start whispering in the audience. Phones flashed here and there as a few attendees tried to capture the moment. The show was live, but everyone knew that clips of this exchange would later flood the internet. The tension in the air made the whole scene feel historic, even before it reached the outside world. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, raising her eyebrows. "See? You don't even argue. Most people would defend themselves by now. You just sit there. Is that your secret, Keanu? Just stay silent and let people think you're wise." That line made the audience burst into laughter again, but it was laughter mixed with suspense. Everyone turned toward Keanu, waiting for the calm man to finally break his silence. And in that moment, his lips curved into the smallest smile, a smile that wasn't defensive or forced, but soft, like someone who wasn't troubled at all by the remark. The host chuckled nervously, glancing between the two. Well, Judy, I think people are here because they admire Keanu exactly for those qualities. Maybe that's the secret, he doesn't have to prove himself. The audience clapped lightly at that, but the tension didn't fade. All eyes were still fixed on Keanu. His reputation for kindness and humility wasn't new, stories about him had circulated for years. People knew about the time he gave part of his movie earnings to crew members, the times he quietly helped strangers, and his choice to live a simple life despite being one of the biggest stars in the world. But hearing Judy openly challenge him about those very values created a moment that demanded a response. Keanu shifted slightly in his chair, his shoulders relaxed, his voice finally breaking the silence. It wasn't loud, it wasn't defensive, but it carried a gentle weight that made the entire audience lean forward. It's true, he began softly, that this world doesn't always reward kindness. Sometimes it seems like the opposite happens. The room went still. His tone wasn't confrontational, it was reflective. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. People who moments ago had been laughing now sat silently, curious about what he would say next. But, he continued, I don't live by kindness because of what the world rewards. I live by it because I believe it matters. Even if nobody notices, even if it doesn't bring fame or money, it changes the small moments. And sometimes, that's enough. A soft murmur ran through the audience. It wasn't applause yet, but it was the kind of quiet sound people make when something touches them deeply, even before they have time to react. Judge Judy tilted her head, studying him, but she didn't interrupt. Perhaps she expected him to defend himself differently, with sharper words, but the way he spoke carried no anger, no need to win. It was simply truth, spoken gently. The host looked impressed, nodding slightly, and the cameras caught the look of respect on several audience members' faces. A few people in the crowd even whispered to each other, as though they wanted to remember his words and repeat them later. But the moment wasn't over yet. Judy leaned forward again, her tone softer this time, but still curious. So, you're saying kindness is worth it, even if the world doesn't care? Keanu gave a small nod. I think the world does care, even if it doesn't always show it. Sometimes, people just need to be reminded. That was it. Simple words, spoken quietly. But they carried more power than the laughter, more weight than the challenge. The audience, who had been holding their breath, finally burst into applause, not loud and wild, but long and steady, the kind of applause that comes from genuine respect. And in that moment, the studio no longer felt divided. Everyone seemed united, caught in the spell of his calm strength. The applause in the studio softened slowly, but the silence that followed carried a different kind of weight. People weren't laughing anymore, nor were they whispering nervously. The audience had leaned in, waiting, sensing that Keanu Reeves was about to share something deeper. His calm voice, his still posture, and his choice of words had already shifted the energy in the room. Now, everyone wanted to hear more. Keanu sat there quietly, his eyes gentle but filled with sincerity. He didn't try to fill the space with quick jokes or clever lines. Instead, he allowed the silence to breathe, as though he respected the moment itself. When he finally spoke again, his words came slowly, measured, but every syllable carried meaning. You know, he began softly, faith is not always about religion. For me, it's about believing that kindness matters, that love matters, that hope matters. I don't always get it right. I'm human. But I try to hold on to these things, because I've learned they can be the only light in very dark places. The audience was utterly silent. Not even the sound of shifting chairs could be heard. It was as if the entire room had been frozen, captured by his quiet honesty. Keanu paused again, his eyes lowering slightly as if he was remembering something far away. Then he continued, his tone still calm but more personal now. There were times in my life when I lost people I loved deeply. My father left when I was young. I lost my best friend, River. Later, I lost the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, and even our child before she was born. There were moments I didn't know if I could carry on. But in those moments, holding on to faith that there was still goodness in the world, faith that life could still hold meaning helped me survive. Gasps could be heard from parts of the audience. Many already knew some of his painful history, but hearing him speak of it so openly, on live television, gave it a rawness that touched everyone. Even Judge Judy, known for her firm expressions, looked taken aback. She shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in judgment, but in reflection, as though she hadn't expected him to open his heart in such a vulnerable way. Keanu leaned back slightly, his hands resting calmly on his knees. His voice didn't shake, but it carried a weight that made people believe every word. When I talk about kindness, it's not because I think I'm better than anyone. It's because I know how much a small kindness can mean when someone is in pain. A smile, a seat given up, a moment of patience. It might not seem like much, but to someone going through something heavy, it can feel like hope. A woman in the audience dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Others nodded slowly, visibly moved. The cameras zoomed in on different faces, capturing their emotional reactions. What had started as a moment of mockery was turning into one of the most powerful, heartfelt conversations the show had ever seen. Judge Judy leaned forward now, her sharp expression softened. "So," she said in a quieter tone, "you really believe kindness can carry people through tragedy?" Keanu gave a small smile, his eyes glancing down for a second before returning to her. "I believe it's the only thing that ever has. When you've lost everything, you remember the people who showed you compassion, not the ones who judged you. That's what stays with you." The words lingered in the air. This time, the audience didn't clap right away. They sat still, absorbing his message. It was clear they were touched, but they were also thinking, reflecting on their own lives, their own losses, their own moments when a simple act of kindness might have saved them from despair. Finally, the applause came. It wasn't wild or rushed. It was steady, respectful, rising louder and louder as more people stood to their feet. Within seconds, nearly the entire studio was on its feet, clapping for him, not as an actor, not as a celebrity, but as a human being who had spoken his truth. Keanu bowed his head slightly, humbly, as though he didn't quite know how to handle the applause. He wasn't smiling widely or soaking in the praise. He simply accepted it with grace, his calm presence unshaken. Judge Judy watched him carefully. For the first time, she didn't have a quick comeback or witty remark. Instead, she gave a small nod, acknowledging the depth of what he had shared. Her sharpness had softened, replaced by a kind of respect she rarely showed on live television. The host, clearly moved, finally spoke. "Keanu, thank you for sharing that. I think everyone here and probably everyone watching at home needed to hear those words today." The audience clapped again, some cheering now, their energy brighter than before. The tension that had filled the studio earlier had completely disappeared. In its place was a sense of unity, of shared humanity, of hope. Keanu looked out at the crowd, his voice calm once more. "I don't expect everyone to agree with me. I don't expect the world to change overnight. But if my words remind even one person to be a little kinder today, then it was worth it." Those simple words struck like an arrow to the heart. The audience clapped once more, many with tears in their eyes. Even Judy, who had begun the conversation with a mocking tone, seemed to smile faintly, as if she had been reminded of something she once believed in herself. What made the moment even more remarkable was the way Keanu never raised his voice, never grew defensive, and never tried to prove he was right. He simply spoke his truth, gently and sincerely, and that was enough to move an entire room of people. The cameras captured every second, and although those in the studio didn't know it yet, this conversation would soon spread across the world. Clips would be shared, quotes would be written, and millions would feel the same quiet inspiration that filled that studio. But for now, inside those four walls, the moment belonged only to the people who were there. A man who had known deep pain had turned a moment of mockery into a lesson in compassion, leaving even the toughest judge in the country with nothing more to say. When the show ended that evening, the audience left the studio with more than just memories of a celebrity guest appearance. Many carried with them a feeling they could not quite describe. Some were silent, still thinking about Keanu Reeves's words. Others chatted excitedly as they walked out, saying things like, "Did you hear what he said about kindness?" or "I wasn't expecting something so deep." A few people even held their phones up, checking the short videos they had secretly recorded during the show. What no one realized in that exact moment was that the conversation they had witnessed was about to travel far beyond the studio. By the time the evening news rolled in, clips from the episode had already started appearing on social media. Someone had uploaded a 30-second video showing Judge Judy questioning Keanu and his thoughtful response about kindness. Within minutes, the clip was being shared rapidly, like sparks catching on dry grass. On Twitter, the video gained thousands of views in the first hour. By the end of the night, it had crossed into the millions. People from different countries, different backgrounds, and different languages were watching the same clip, and all of them felt the same thing: surprise and admiration at the way Keanu had turned mockery into a moment of grace. Comments began flooding in. "This man is a living example of humility," one user wrote. "The world needs more people like Keanu Reeves," another said. Some even wrote, "This isn't just about a celebrity. It's a lesson for all of us." News outlets picked up the story quickly. Headlines appeared: "Keanu Reeves silences Judge Judy with kindness, a viral moment of grace on live TV, and why Keanu's words are touching millions worldwide." Journalists highlighted how unusual it was for a Hollywood star to remain so calm and kind when being openly challenged. Instead of responding with anger or defensiveness, Keanu had chosen honesty and compassion, and that choice had struck a chord with people everywhere. On Instagram, celebrities and influencers began sharing the clip too. Some added their own reflections in the captions. A popular singer wrote, "Keanu just reminded us all that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength." A well-known author posted, "What he said about holding on to faith in the darkest times. I felt that deeply." Within days, the clip was everywhere. YouTube uploads of the moment drew millions of views, with comments sections filled with people sharing personal stories. Some wrote about their own struggles with grief or loss, saying Keanu's words helped them feel less alone. Others admitted that they often wondered whether kindness still mattered in a harsh world, but his calm response gave them hope again. The reach wasn't limited to English-speaking countries. Translations of his words appeared in Spanish, French, Japanese, Arabic, and countless other languages. Each translation carried the same message, that kindness, humility, and faith still had power in today's world. The message was simple, but it crossed every barrier, touching hearts everywhere. In workplaces, people began discussing it during coffee breaks. In schools, teachers used the clip as a talking point in lessons about empathy and values. Families watched it together at home, nodding as they listened. It became more than just a viral moment, it became a global conversation. Not all the attention was serious, of course. Memes were made too. Some showed Keanu sitting calmly with the caption, "When the world mocks you, answer with kindness." Others playfully showed Judge Judy's surprised expression next to his gentle smile. But even in the humor, the respect for his response was clear. The internet had turned the exchange into both inspiration and entertainment, but the core message remained intact. Keanu himself, however, stayed silent about the whole thing. He didn't post on social media. He didn't make a statement. He didn't go on interviews to explain what he meant. His silence added even more strength to the moment. People admired that he wasn't trying to use the viral fame for his own gain. He had spoken his truth, and now he let it belong to the world. Judge Judy also made headlines in the following days. Some articles questioned whether her remarks had been too harsh, while others defended her as simply playing her usual role of being blunt and challenging. After a few days, she clarified in a statement that she hadn't meant to offend Keanu. "I was teasing him," she said. "I've always respected him, but I didn't expect such a thoughtful response. That's why it caught me off guard." Her clarification calmed some of the online debate, but most people were far more focused on Keanu's side of the story. For many, it didn't matter whether Judy had intended to mock him or just tease him. What mattered was how he had responded with grace instead of anger. In the weeks that followed, the clip continued to circulate. Talk shows discussed it. Podcasts replayed it. Opinion writers published essays about it. Some described it as a rare reminder of decency in a time when arguments and conflicts often dominated headlines. Others said it proved that humility could still capture people's attention in a world addicted to loud voices. One evening news anchor put it perfectly during a broadcast: "It wasn't a speech filled with dramatic words. It wasn't even long. But Keanu Reeves's quiet message about kindness has reached further than many political speeches or celebrity interviews." Sometimes, the simplest truths are the most powerful. The viral spread had unexpected effects too. Charities that promoted kindness and mental health reported an increase in donations after referencing Keanu's words. Online forums where people usually argued harshly began threads about kindness, with users sharing acts of compassion they had witnessed. Even people who admitted they weren't fans of his movies said they admired him as a human being. Days turned into weeks, but the story refused to die down. Every time it seemed like the internet was moving on, someone else would repost the clip, and it would spark fresh discussions all over again. It was as if people didn't want to let go of the reminder that even in a world filled with division, there was still room for gentleness and dignity. And so, what began as a tense exchange on a live television show became one of the most talked about viral moments of the year. Millions had seen it. Millions had shared it. But more importantly, millions had felt something from it, something real, something hopeful. The studio audience that night had sensed something special when Keanu spoke. Now, the whole world understood what they had felt. In the weeks following the broadcast, the world didn't stop talking about Keanu Reeves's response. What had started as a small exchange on a television set had grown into a global conversation. News channels replayed the moment, podcasts analyzed it, and social media platforms filled with endless clips and quotes. Yet, through all the noise, one detail stood out clearly: Keanu himself stayed silent. Unlike most celebrities who might have taken the chance to do interviews, release statements, or use the attention to promote their work, Keanu went on living exactly as he always did. He was spotted riding the subway, stopping to take pictures with fans, and quietly working on his new projects. His silence only made people admire him more. It proved that his words on stage weren't meant as a performance, they were his truth. Judge Judy, on the other hand, had her own wave of attention. At first, she was criticized harshly for mocking Keanu's faith and values. Headlines accused her of being too blunt, even cruel. But within days, she released a public clarification. In her statement, she explained that she had meant her comments as light-hearted teasing, the kind of humor she was known for, but she admitted she had been surprised by Keanu's deeply thoughtful response. "He gave an answer that stayed with me," she confessed. "It wasn't what I expected. Maybe I learned something too." That admission softened the public's view of her role in the exchange. Some even praised her honesty, saying that it showed strength to admit she had been moved by someone else's words. But still, the story always circled back to Keanu. The power of the moment wasn't in the question but in the answer. And as the weeks rolled on, people began to talk less about the clash and more about the lesson it left behind. Teachers in schools used the clip to talk to students about respect and kindness. "See how he didn't fight back, but he still stood strong," one teacher explained to her class. "That's real strength." Students listened, some even writing essays about how the video inspired them to treat others better. In workplaces, managers shared the clip during meetings, encouraging employees to handle conflicts with the same grace. "We can disagree without anger," one manager said, replaying Keanu's calm words. Employees nodded, some smiling, realizing how unusual it was for a celebrity moment to enter their daily professional lives. Charity groups saw a rise in support too. Campaigns for mental health, anti-bullying, and community kindness quoted Keanu's words in their advertisements. A smile, a seat given up, a moment of patience. It might not seem like much, but to someone going through something heavy, it can feel like hope. That single line became a slogan for more than one campaign, spreading further than Keanu himself could have imagined. In the media, commentators described the moment as rare proof that humility could still inspire people. A well-known journalist wrote, "In an age when loud voices dominate headlines, Keanu Reeves reminded us that quiet dignity still has the power to move millions." Another writer noted, "What Judy meant as a challenge became a gift, because it gave Keanu the chance to remind the world of something timeless: kindness is never outdated." But while the world buzzed, Keanu remained distant from the spotlight. He did not attend events to celebrate the viral fame. He did not seek to correct anyone's interpretations of his words. Instead, he carried on with his life as though nothing unusual had happened. Fans spotted him reading alone at a park, walking down the street without an entourage, and quietly filming his next project. That normalcy was what made people love him even more. Judge Judy was invited back to talk shows where the incident was brought up. Sometimes she laughed it off, saying, "He got me good that day." Other times, she admitted that she had been thinking more about kindness since then. Though she never completely changed her famously sharp personality, people noticed a slight shift in her tone when she spoke about values. It was subtle, but it showed she hadn't forgotten. Months later, the clip was still circulating. Even after news stories filled the headlines, the moment kept returning, shared by people who stumbled across it for the first time. "Why am I only seeing this now?" many wrote in the comments. "This is exactly what I needed today." The video seemed timeless, able to touch new viewers again and again. For many, it became more than just a viral clip. It became a reminder they carried with them. A young man in Brazil said he decided to volunteer at a shelter because of Keanu's words. A teacher in India used the story to remind her students that strength is not about shouting the loudest. A woman in Canada shared that after watching the video, she reached out to an old friend she had drifted away from, simply because she realized kindness shouldn't be delayed. The impact of that single conversation stretched far beyond television. It slipped into daily lives, into choices people made, into the way they treated one another. And that, perhaps, was the greatest proof of its power. As for Keanu, he never claimed credit for any of it. He never spoke about how far his words had traveled, nor did he try to shape the story around himself. To him, it had simply been a moment of honesty, a response to a question. Yet to the world, it had been something unforgettable. In time, the incident came to be remembered as one of those rare cultural moments when simplicity broke through noise. People didn't remember every detail of the show, or even every word spoken, but they remembered the feeling they had when they heard him speak. A sense of calm. A reminder of hope. A belief that even in a tough world, dignity and kindness could still shine. For Judge Judy, the exchange became a story she would be asked about many times in the years to come. And though she was used to being the one who had the last word, she admitted more than once that on that day, it was Keanu's quiet answer that had stayed with her. The legacy of that moment was not in debates, not in arguments, and not even in the headlines. It was in the countless people who chose, even for a single day, to be a little kinder because of what they had heard. And so, what began as a teasing remark on live television became a lesson carried around the world. It proved that sometimes the strongest voice is the one that stays calm, and the most powerful answer is the one spoken with kindness. Keanu never tried to own that legacy, but it followed him all the same. And long after the cameras had turned off, long after the applause had faded, his gentle words lived on, inspired, remembered, and shared across the world, a simple reminder that humility has a strength all its own.